So you're against Harriet Harman's position on the welfare cuts announced in the budget. You've got this petition. So are you now leading a rebellion? Should Labour MPs currently follow their interim leader, Harriet Harman, or should they follow you?
I was very surprised and very disappointed that Harriet made the statement that she did yesterday. There was no consultation with anyone in the party about it. And she announced, well, you heard it, that we were, as a party, supposed to be accepting what the government was trying to do. And there are a number of issues we need to unravel here, really three. One is the second child onwards policy, where child tax credit is not available, or children's allowances are not available for the larger families. That's very unfair on children of large families. Secondly, the question of the welfare cap, reducing to 23,000 in London, 20,000 outside London, has a devastating effect on poor families living in private rented sector. And the third is, of course, the family tax credit cut altogether.
Yeah, but should Labour MPs follow you or Harriet Harman?
Well, there's a meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party this evening, and I hope they will decide, if there's to be a decision made there, that we should be opposing what the government is doing.
So you're leading a rebellion right now?
I'm suggesting that we should be against it. That's why I put a petition up, and indeed an awful lot of people in the Labour Party say exactly the same thing.
So you've got no problem with somebody coming from abroad as a migrant with 5 kids, say, and claiming 5 lots of child tax credits, 5 lots of child benefits, housing benefit, no limit on their benefits at all?
People don't just walk into the country and claim benefits. First of all, they've got to be allowed.
No, but let's assume they've got here. You've got no problem with that scenario.
People living here in Britain deserve to be able to live decently. Every child deserves to be able to be fed properly, go to school and live decently.
So just answer that scenario.
That is what the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is about. That is what the Children's Act is about.
So that's a long way of saying you've got no problem with that scenario. 5 kids from wherever, Eastern Europe, come to Britain.
People and children.
No limit on their benefits.
People and children come first. The amount of money involved is not that great when compared to the total budget as a whole. What we're doing is going in a wrong direction by impoverishing children of large families, and particularly in London, where the benefit cap has had a devastating effect on people in the private rented sector. Now, why is the benefit bill so big?
Well, hang on, let me ask the questions, OK?
OK.
Right. Why do you think people who voted Conservative in 2015 will suddenly vote for a socialist in 2020?
Because everyone wants to live in a decent society. Everyone is one accident away from a dependence on the welfare state and dependence on the NHS. Everybody has older people who need adult social care.
But they were this year. They voted Tory.
And they've seen the consequences of it in this budget. Cut in corporation tax, cut in benefits, sale of state assets, the wealthiest doing the best out of this budget, the poorest doing the worst. That is what a Tory government is about.
Have you converted any Conservatives since the election? Have you got any supporters who voted Conservative at the last election?
I've met quite a lot of people at the various hustings and public events we've been at who voted UKIP, who are now beginning to regret it because they realise...
you haven't converted any Tories so far?
I haven't been going around meeting Tories. It's been a Labour...
Yeah, but you need to win Tories round, don't you, at the next election?
The Labour Party needs to win a lot of people round, particularly young people who didn't vote, particularly young people who didn't register, particularly people who were so disillusioned with the sameness of the main political parties and economic policy that they didn't see any point.
One of the sameness things is immigration, where Labour and the Conservatives seem to say that immigration is too high. What do you think?
I think the whole narrative on immigration has been quite unpleasant, and it fails to recognise the huge contribution that people who have migrated to this country have made to this country, that have made to the health service, education, transport and everything else. The fact that they come here, they work, they pay taxes, they make a great contribution to our society. And there are 2 million people from Britain living abroad. If you end the free movement of people across Europe, which is mainly what UKIP and those that are concerned about this talk about, then what would happen the other way around? If we start saying to people from other parts of Europe living in Britain that they've got to go back home, what happens to those 2 million people living in France, Spain, Italy and other European countries?
What about those thousands of people in Calais desperate to get into Britain? Should we let them in?
We should let people into this country who are desperate to get somewhere safe to live. We should be properly supporting refugees. The numbers of people, refugees that go to Germany is far greater than any other European country, far greater. Germany has taken in a lot of refugees and actually done very well out of the economic contribution those people have made.
What rate of income tax is too high?
The rate of income tax ought to be set on the ability to pay it, and at the moment the top rate is too low. I would go 50% and possibly slightly higher, but I'm actually more interested in collecting uncollected corporation tax and corporate taxation.
Would 60% be too high?
Can I finish? The real issue is corporate tax fraud across the world.
I don't think anyone would disagree with that.
Well, right, so why don't we concentrate on that then?
Is 60% too high?
For somebody earning a very large salary, no, because if somebody's earning several £1 million at the moment, there is nothing beyond the cap on going up to 45%. There's nothing beyond that.
Well, is 70% too high then?
I don't think we need to go that high. But
is it too high?
In a moral sense, no, but I don't.
So there is no limit, is there?
I didn't say that. You're putting words in my mouth. I didn't say that at all.
Well, then what is the limit?
I'm not going to put a limit on it. I don't see why anybody should put a limit on it. I think we have to say we have a finite need of providing health, education, providing social services, supporting housing, supporting infrastructure, all those very important areas of government expenditure. And the biggest problem area is not income tax, it's actually corporation tax and corporate tax evasion.
But the bigger point is how much inequality we are prepared to live with in this country, isn't it? So is your goal to end income inequality?
My goal is to reduce inequality. To completely end inequality is obviously a very difficult thing to do, but the levels of inequality that have grown to such catastrophic levels in Britain have to be challenged. The 100 richest people own as much as a third of the entire population. We have the grossest levels of income disparity of anywhere in Europe. We have the very wealthy buying up large parts of London in order to keep it empty and use it as an investment bank for the future.
So how much
whilst we have,
should we accept? Should we accept the existence of super rich people? Or would there be no super rich people in Britain if you were Prime Minister?
Are super rich people actually happy with being super rich?
No, I'm asking you, would you end them?
I would want the super rich to be able to pay properly their share of the needs of the rest of the community.
So they wouldn't be super rich anymore, would they?
But the issue is actually that there's a crossover between income tax and high-income people over towards the corporate tax sector, and they often evade taxation by that means. And so I think we should be looking at the way in which big companies, Boots and others, shifted their head offices out of Britain into low tax regimes and pretending that their income has solely come from those areas. That is tax evasion on a grand scale.
Let's briefly talk about foreign affairs. Why did you call Hamas and Hezbollah your friends?
What I did was spoke at a meeting in which I said I wanted all people involved in the Middle East issue to come together and be able to have a discussion, to be able to discuss. Can you allow me to finish? Do you mind?
Yeah, but I asked you a question and you're ignoring it.
No, I'm not ignoring the question. If you'd give me a minute, I'll answer it. The point is this. Listen for a minute, if you don't mind. I spoke at a meeting about the Middle East crisis in Parliament, and there were people there from Hezbollah, and I said I welcomed our friends from Hezbollah to have a discussion and a debate. And I said I wanted Hamas to be part of that debate. I have met Hamas in Lebanon, and I've met Hezbollah in this country in Lebanon. I've also met...
Are they your friends or not?
Can I finish?
Are they your friends or not?
Can I finish? I've also met...
Well, you can't if it's a long answer.
Look, the issue is this. You are not prepared to discuss the whole issue of the Middle East. You're not prepared to discuss the wider question. The wider question is Hamas, Hezbollah are part of a peace process. Even the former head of Mossad says that there has to be talks involving Hamas. I've also had discussions with people from the right in Israeli politics who have the same view, possibly, that the state of Israel should extend from the river to the sea, as it is claimed people from the Palestinian side do.
And I'm very happy for you to make all of that clear. But I'm saying you use these words, friends. Now, are you saying they're not your friends? Or are you saying they are your friends?
I'm saying that people I talk to I use it in a collective way, saying our friends we're prepared to talk to. Does it mean I agree with Hamas and what it does? No. Does it mean I agree with Hezbollah and what they do? No. What it means is that I think to bring about a peace process, you have to talk to people with whom you may profoundly disagree. There is not going to be any peace process unless there is talks involving Israel, Hezbollah and Hamas. And I think everybody knows that.
But as you know, the controversy is around you calling them friends. And you've explained, I think, that when you said that, you didn't mean that they're friends. Is that fair?
I used it in a collective way at a discussion, and you're trying to trivialise the whole issue of the Middle East. You're trying to trivialise the whole discussion about how you bring about a long-term peace process.
I'm very happy to have long conversations with you.
Well, why don't we have them then?
And you've been on this programme talking about the Middle East many times.
Well, not
before.
very recently, actually. You haven't had me on for a long time.
But this quote about friends has surfaced, and that's what I was asking you about, and you've had your opportunity to...
Well, thanks for the tabloid journalism.
To answer. That's not tabloid journalism.
Yes, it is.
That's putting your own words back to you.
Tabloid journalism where you're evading. You were evading asking me to give an opportunity to discuss the wider issue of the Middle East.
Because
all you're interested in...
what I was going to ask you next was something rather more important.
No, it's tabloid journalism and you know it.
Well, it's absolutely not. I was asking you about your own words, and if you're not prepared to defend your own words, then that's fine.
I'm quite prepared to defend my own words. I've just done so.
I want to get on to a bigger aspect of foreign policy, which we could have done minutes ago had you just answered the question when I answered it, which is it noble, is it right to continue doing nothing to intervene in Syria?
I think the decision not to bomb Syria or to bomb Syria, not to bomb Syria, is an important one. If we'd started bombing now, what would it achieve? Probably not very much. It would then be followed up by ground forces, and we'd then be back into a war. I think the issue has to be choking off the arms supply and the money that goes to ISIL, recognise where ISIL have come from, and also recognising, I think there was quite a big mistake in not reconvening the Geneva conference involving Iran, which could have helped to bring about a much earlier point of ceasefire in the other part of the Syrian civil war, that is between the government of Syria, Free Syrian Army and the Kurdish forces, as opposed to the ISIL forces, which have grown significantly in the past year. I don't think British intervention by military means is going to bring about a solution to it. I think there has to be ultimately a political solution. I think we also need to look at the role that Saudi Arabia and other countries are playing in the arms they're putting into the area.
So you think Ed Miliband was right?
Yes.
To end that chance of military intervention when he did?
Indeed, I was...
Despite the fact so many people have died and ISIS have taken hold...
Would military intervention have brought that about? Because indeed, those that were advocating we intervened at that time were very unclear on which particular group in Syria we're then going to support. There were people already fighting in Syria who later became part of the ISIL forces. Would we have been actually supporting ISIL forces? Nobody can really answer that question. It was very unclear what the strategy was.
Let me just finally bring you back to the election. Were Britain's voters wrong, or was Labour wrong?
We didn't appeal to enough people on the economic issues because we were offering an austerity-light package in the general election. This austerity-light package would have resulted in further cuts, particularly to local government expenditure. And whilst Ed Miliband did very well and was quite right on zero-hours contracts, conditions of work and pay levels, the problem was that he was saddled with an economic strategy that wasn't sufficiently different. I think we need to challenge the principles of the austerity agenda.
Let me ask you one more thing then about that. I know I said that was my last question, but I did have another one I really wanted to ask you. Which things would you nationalise?
Particularly the railway industry. I think Royal Mail should be in public ownership. It's a natural monopoly. And I think the energy companies that have significantly or spectacularly failed to bring about a fair market in energy products, I think those are the areas that public ownership is really very much needed.
What about the banks? Would you keep them?
Well, we already do have considerable public ownership of the banks. The problem with the nationalisation was that it was a quite limited form of nationalisation because it was share ownership rather than public control. I'm against the sale of the bank shares, and I am in favour of the government, any government, using its influence on those banks, because some of them have not been loaning money to developing companies or to investment in manufacturing industry. Some have actually spent their time investing in the buy-to-rent market, for example, rather than in developing industry in this country. And so I do think there has to be an influence, a very strong state influence on the way the banks behave, as well as obviously regulation to avoid the return of a crisis such as we had in 2008.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very much.
Thank you.